Welcome to Confessions of a Terrible Leader, where real leaders share the raw truth about the lessons they learned the hard way so you don't have to. Join our host, Layci Nelson, founder of Transcend Leadership Collective and former terrible leader. On this podcast, we invite you to step into the confessional and get real with the messy stories and behind-the-scenes reality of leadership. Let's get to it.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Confessions of a Terrible Leader. I'm your host and former terrible leader herself, Layci Nelson. Today, I am so thrilled to have Rachel Burr joining us. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Layci.
We are in, listeners, for some really good conversation just by the title of this woman's book alone. You got to know it's going to be a good conversation today. Rachel has a new book coming out. It's called Butterfly Goo, The Down and Dirty Truth of Transformation. Rachel is an executive coach with a lot of experience working in corporate settings as well as mid and small size business. Did I get that right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And she probably has seen a lot in her time, I'm guessing, in working with executives across those platforms. And I am just thrilled to dig in and have a great conversation about people and all of our weirdness and quirkiness. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Rachel, I think we hear terms thrown around all the time and we just kind of start to numb out to what do they actually mean.
Yes.
What is an executive coach? What the heck is that?
It's a great question. And my guess is if you asked multiple people, they may give you multiple answers.
Yep.
The way I look at it is an executive coach is really there to support the leader, not to fix the leader, because I have been asked to do that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't fix people. I'm not an auto mechanic and they're not a car. I find that in terms of a lot of leadership is mindset. It's not a functional skill base, which I think is really important. You have mentors that can really help with things like that. I work with clients on mindset and approach when it comes to people, when it comes to their interactions, their communications, that I think leaders are often hired or promoted because of what they do really well. They're usually rock stars in their functional world. Most companies do not prepare people to really be leaders because they lead people. I was talking to someone the other day, until you lead robots, you need to learn to lead people.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things I love helping leaders do is to navigate the gray. When leaders get to higher levels in an organization, their jobs become more ambiguous. They become more gray. And being able to see progress or understand if what you're doing is working, it doesn't have that immediate, feedback or gratification that it did when you were individual contributor, especially. Yes. Do you have metrics? Do you have KPIs? Of course you do. But those are lag indicators. Right. They are not immediate. And so a lot of leaders struggle with that ambiguity. And so I work with them to help them understand what is actually being required of them as a leader. And I always say, I do not believe in cookie cutters. A lot of folks see leadership as, okay, it's this thing. And I'm here to tell them, I am not here to turn you into somebody you're not. It's about figuring out who you are at your core, your talents, your values, your strengths, even figuring out your weaknesses and how do we mitigate or work with them. And then how do you bring that? How do you bring the best of who you are, embrace that and bring it to your role as a leader? Because there will be things that work or don't work. And there are different requirements for different leadership roles.
Yep.
Regardless, you need to bring your full best self to that role. And that is how you will be most successful.
I love that. We work a lot with executive teams as well. And one of the challenges that we have, and sounds like you share this, is helping people understand. They want us to come in and give them a list of hard skills and tactics that they're going to learn.
They do.
And while we can provide some of that, so much of it is understanding how to navigate the gray and understanding the mindset work and understanding that you have to go slow to go fast, right? You have to really slow down and understand, do the deep thinking work that doesn't have an immediate tangible result, that does require a vulnerability first and an honesty with yourself to get where you are even in the mindset to understand the framework. How would you articulate some of the blocks, some of the ones that you see coming up over and over and over again? What are some patterns in your work with multiple executives that you're like, yes, everyone's different, and I often see
Oh,
these
yes.
themes arise?
Yes. In fact, I'm working with a younger leader right now, and he, I think, is in one of those places where he is worried that it's just him. It's kind of one of those things where, we all want to be unique. We all want to be different.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go to the doctor, you never want to be more typical than standing in that office. If something goes wrong, you
Oh my
want the
gosh,
doctor to say to
yes.
you, yep, textbook. You
Yep.
don't want the doctor to say, wow, that's fascinating. I've never seen that before.
Right.
No. So confirming for him and really helping him feel more comfortable that no,
Mm-hmm.
you are going through the process. This is what it is to become a leader. People talk about you may have skills and things that predispose you to be a good leader. You still have to learn to be a
Yes.
leader. So let's see some of the things that I see most typically. One, which I think is so much fun, especially in the days of Zoom or when people can see and record themselves, we judge ourselves by our intent. The intent, the effect, and how we want to come across, the results we want to gain. Other people judge us and evaluate us based on their experience of us.
Yep.
And what I will tell leaders is there is always going to be a gap. There just is. And so the idea is, how do you become more aware of that gap? What does it look like? And when you think about the kind of leader you want to be versus what others' experience is, how do we close that gap?
Right.
And one of the ways it's been so much fun is because we've been doing so many meetings on Zoom and things, we can record them.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they'll do is they'll send me the recording. I'll spend some time going through it, queue up a few things, and then we'll watch it. It's great because the first time out of the gate is always a little painful.
Oh,
it's
brutal. It's brutal.
It's brutal. And I like to say that I am direct and supportive.
Uh-huh.
People confuse direct, which is another piece we'll talk about as a leader, the challenge, but people confuse direct with harsh. And I want to tell them, look, I am going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you my version of the truth because none of us are objective. And then I'll put it on the table and we can talk about it. I find, and I am not the only one that finds this, but as leaders go up the ladder, right, or matrix or whatever structure you're in, people start to edit themselves. And the leader doesn't realize that's what's happening because they still see themselves as one of the people.
Yep.
They don't realize that you may feel that way, but the people around you don't.
Do not.
So how you show up in these meetings with your team, very important. So I remember doing this one call with this leader, big personality, really knew the business, does know the business. And we watched a little bit of the video with his executive team and and it happened to be he was interacting with this one individual specifically. And after I queued it up and turned it off, and I'm like, okay, you tell me what you saw. He's like, I basically bludgeoned him with a 2x4. I'm like, yes, you did. And then when he fell on the ground, you hit him like, 6 more times just to make sure he'd stay there.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was this early awakening. And again, we still tend to see ourselves in the way we expect to, but having more tangible proof of the experience outside of you, it was a great way to start chipping into that armor. We had so much fun. And I even had some of his leaders come up to me later and say, hey, can I keep paying you to keep working with him just in case he doesn't all facetiously.
Yeah.
At one of the meetings, one of the people who worked for him tried to slip me 100, kind of saying, just keep going. It was just all a jest.
Right.
I love that when you watch leaders who have such a strength and they are so good, but they are having a negative impact that they don't intend on their team.
Yes.
And you watch them shift that and start to bring that best self in a way that can be received the way they intend. That is so rewarding.
Absolutely. Tell me more about your motivation. We were talking before we hit record and you said the book took you about 1.5 years to write, but 20 years to prepare for. Tell me a little bit about your evolution of, this book needs to exist in the world. What took it from, I should maybe write a book to, I'm writing a book?
For a long time, well, maybe not my whole life, I've had this idea of writing a book. And every time I tried to come up with, well, what am I going to write about? it never felt right. It didn't feel compelling. It felt like a task or a chore. And I just struggled. And then as I got into my professional life, I started thinking, okay, well, I should write a business book or I should write a coaching book. We're experts, or at least we have significant knowledge in the field. Could not get myself to do it. So I went to writing workshops and I did self-exploration and I hired a writing coach and I hired a different coach, all of these things. And this actually shows up in terms of our own evolution and transformation. But something finally clicked where I realized I don't want to write these books. That what I want to write is an experience. I want to write about my experience, and I want it to be something where other people can have takeaways. They can have ideas for their own life. And I am not trying to tell people how to live at all.
Right.
It's more about putting myself out there in a humorous way. Humor is extremely important to me. And I have a very strong voice when it comes to humor. And that, I think, was one of the steps also. I found a couple authors that had this very authentic, not formal voice at all. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can bring that to a book.
Yes.
I originally thought about it more as a self-help, and then it really turned into a memoir with self-help aspects to it and exercises at the end. And once I realized that I could write through me as me, it's just poured out of me. It was like this conduit that I wasn't even sure I was writing at the time. It was like something was writing through me. The way I was describing it to someone was, this book has been trying to write itself through me for a very long time. And I finally stopped fighting it.
I love it. What are some things that you want people to walk away with if they read your book? Why should someone pick it up? What state do they need to be in to be like, yeah, this would be helpful for me?
This book is really about personal transformation, and it is about dispelling the myth of personal transformation that somehow on the outside, we see this beautiful, very curated social media, like, oh, this is transformation. And someone just shows up one day and they have an epiphany and it's beautiful. And that's why the Butterfly Goo, I have always resonated with the butterfly as a symbol of transformation, not because it's beautiful, although it is, but because its beauty actually distracts from the arduous work that is transformation. The goo part is the caterpillar. I'm going to say spins its cocoon. My brother, who's an entomologist, is very clear that butterflies come out of a chrysalis and moths come out of a cocoon. But I'm like, yeah, I'm sticking with the metaphor because this is what people know.
Right.
So the caterpillar spins itself into this cocoon and it basically dissolves into this gelatinous goo. The thing I love about it is that caterpillar is going to rebuild itself into a butterfly. It takes everything it needs into that cocoon that it needs to rebuild. There is nothing that caterpillar does not already have inside of it that it needs to be a butterfly. We all have what we need. We go to our core and we can rebuild from that core. And again, it's not about turning ourselves into something we're not. It's about finding the best of who we are. And the idea that the butterfly is this amazing transformation. It's not. The butterfly is the result of the transformation. The transformation is the step-by-step process, all the work that went into that by that caterpillar through that process. And so what I want to do is I want to break it down so that people understand transformation. I want to make it more actionable. I want to make it more achievable. And through my own vulnerability, humor, all of that, I want them to feel like, well, if she can do it, certainly I can do it.
Right.
And, people get to take this journey with me as much or as little as they want. If you want to go through it, I have takeaways at the ends of the chapters. There's going to be a playground area at the back with exercises. If you want to play around, again, not forcing transformation, but just giving you a space to play and experiment. If you want to do that, great. If you just want to read the book, I'm hoping you laugh. And if you want to take in that schadenfreude of just being really happy you're not me, then do that. It's one of those, you choose your own adventure. You get to take as much or as little from it as you want. It's up to you.
I'm really resonating with hearing how do we make it more actionable, right? Because people are going to say, well, that's great. I don't want to be in the goo. I'm in the goo. How do I start? What do? I need a blueprint for these molecules. When you say making it more actionable,
yes.
How do you do that? How do you make it actionable?
That is part of the exercises at the end of the book. For example, one of the exercises is there's a point in the book where I know I need to make a change. I know I want to say, I'm going to quit my job. I want to do something different. I want to go somewhere different. I have no idea what that is.
Right.
A lot of us start in those places where, people will say, oh, I had this vision. I had this. And it's like, there's a lot of parts where I started. I'm like, I have no idea. All I know is I don't know what I want, but I know I don't want this.
Yeah. Yep.
So helping people, I'll talk them through how I approach that process. For example, even starting off with, okay, I know I don't want to be here. For example, I didn't want to stay living in the place where I was living. So I started to think about, first of all, what are my criteria? What do I want?
Right.
I wanted to live someplace that had moderate climate. I had lived in the Midwest my whole life. For my Midwestern friends and family, I love you. I loved growing up in the Midwest, and it's cold.
It's so cold.
So I was really thinking someplace a little bit more temperate. I had also grown up in areas that were flat. I was thinking someplace, mountains, ocean, something like that. And my last criterion was actually live within 3 hours of someone I know. I had never really just picked up and moved someplace where I didn't know anybody. I was completely starting over. And I thought if I was so homesick that at least I would have somebody out there.
Yeah.
So then what I help people think about is when you look at that criteria, because it's one of the problems we always have. We want everything. We want it to all work. And it's not going to. It's just not. So first of all, how do you rank order your criteria? Yep. So most important to least. And then going back again and redigesting and saying, okay, what's an absolute must have? What's pretty important? And what's the kind of cherry on top? And then looking at that in the rank. And if those don't line up, then go back again. And now you have a filter. You have a way to look at and evaluate. I mean, it could be just a spaghetti toss. If you're fine with that, then put up a map of wherever you think you want to live and throw a dart. Do that. It's your process. You get to do whatever you want. If you want something that's more focused and that, to your point, is more actionable, then do that. Then when you start to look and I say, okay, well, what about Denver? Well, mountains, great. This still cold, but the snow goes away pretty quickly, et cetera. And then versus California, North Carolina, New York. What I say is also that there's the science and there's the art or the gut. It is not meant to say one is better than the other. In fact, we need both. Well, people make decisions all the time that aren't based on any kind of fact, but what they want.
Every day.
So what I say is doing this in this process helps you get down to the idea that maybe there are 2 or 3 options at the end. You're like, well, all of these are good. All of these meet my criteria. That's when your gut steps in. It's like, okay, you know that any one of these could possibly be good for you. What does your gut say?
Yes.
You're setting your gut up to be successful because I firmly believe that, and I'm sure the neuroscientists out there can tell me this is wrong, but I believe that a lot of times our gut or the intuition is our brain working in the background, ticking and tying things in a way that at this moment just don't have access to our consciousness or maybe even our verbal centers, but it's still really important. Emotions are important. They are data.
Yes.
They are telling us something.
Yep.
And I say in the book, it's not necessarily that your emotions are right, but it's worth a conversation.
Yes. We definitely are in alignment on helping people learn to even be able to hear their gut, listen, tune into themselves.
Yep.
There can oftentimes be a strong mistrust of their intuition or a complete disconnect from it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
They don't even know how to tap it.
Yes. I'm going to call my dad out. He probably won't like this. But when he listens to it, he'll know I'm right. He hates the word intuition. I really tried to dig into it onto why. And my dad is a very practical, kind of black and white thinker. He just thinks that idea that, that's just nonsense.
Yeah.
I explained to him exactly what I just explained to you. I said, Dad, intuition isn't magic. It's not something that's out there, kind of undecipherable or whatever. It is in you. It's just the fact that we have spent so much time trying to ignore that, I think, especially as we like to think of ourselves as these very rational beings that make decisions based on fact. It's not true. I mean, the research has shown that most of our decisions are actually based on emotion, and then we use facts to justify those decisions.
Study the science, look into marketing for 10 minutes and read how they play our emotions all the time. And if you go from that angle, we are not rational beings at all.
There's a little bit of it in there, but this process that I was talking about, for example, and this is just one exercise, it's a good way to give room to also that analytical part, the rational part of your brain, and then give room to that emotional intuition so that you're really helping them bring the respective strengths to this decision.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I could talk to you for a month, I think. However, in the interest of giving the people what they come for, we are opening the door, inviting you into the confessional. What is your confession you came to make today about your own leadership journey?
It was a little hard to pick because I have so many examples. I will just start off, especially for your audience, is saying, you know what? If you are making mistakes, it's beautiful, because that means you're outside your comfort zone. We do not make mistakes inside our comfort zone. First of all,
I love that.
Bravo for messing up.
Yep.
The example I came up with, I was working for a global company, and I was working with the executive team around engagement. Companies have these engagement surveys. I won't name names for different organizations that provide them, lots of them out there.
Yep.
What happens a lot of times is you get these very high level results.
Yeah.
And a lot of leaders, going back to leaders, a lot of times have trouble with the people aspects of leadership. It's very hard to be able to translate this down into things that are actionable for their teams. That was one of my first mistakes, was not really understanding how challenging that can be. Because when I look at it from my perspective, I'm like, oh, well, yeah, this is intuitive.
Right. Or it's obvious.
It's obvious.
It's jumping off the page.
It's because we underestimate how much other people know compared to what we know. And it's true. I had a friend who took me through an exercise that was an IT problem that he was helping me with. And I was really struggling because he had such a depth of knowledge, expertise. And I was really struggling. And I had this aha. I was like, oh, this is how people feel when I talk about leadership. And they don't have that. That was my first mistake, assuming that if I provided them this information, I provided them this actionable piece, that they would be able to take it and run with it. Because they said it was important. And I have no doubt that that was absolutely true. They knew it was important. So I proposed an approach and I got what I thought was buy-in. But what it was an awareness that this was a problem. And yes, go off, do, and that's great. I didn't really dig in to understand, okay, what does this look like in your organization? What problems is this causing? What would success look like for you? What is it that you want it to be?
Yes.
I didn't do that. Instead, I got so excited. One of the things I am good at is getting other people excited. If I have a passion for it, I get other people excited.
Yep.
I had this idea that we would do focus groups. We would really dig into, okay, here's what's happening, what's underneath that, and doing those interviews. And I love this kind of thing. I love the social science interviews, all of this. And I was the head of leadership in OD. So I engaged the HR business partners because I needed more than me to go out and do this. And I wanted to make sure also that they were in line and they were partnering because they would be key with the leadership. So I got them really excited. And then they started talking about, well, yeah, but you can't just do them in the US. We need to do them in Europe, and we need to do them in India, and we need to do them in South America. These 10 focus groups ended up, I think it was close to 60, like 60 focus groups that we ended up doing across 13 countries, multiple languages that got translated in. So exciting. I worked with another person, and basically we took the themes from all of this and distilled it down into 10 things, 10 key things that these all had in common. And then there were always going to be nuances in different locations, which is great. So excited. I took this back, presented it to the leadership team, and they're like, yeah, that's great. And nothing happened. Nothing. I was so upset at the time. And obviously, when we start, you're really mad at other people. But really, it was me. I didn't take the time up front to really dive in to understand. And I didn't do a good job influencing along the way to pull them in. I know they knew this was a problem. I knew that in action, day in and day out, these things were playing out, and they may not have realized why or what, but they knew something was going on. But I did not tie these together. I did not help them see that this is connected to what you're doing. And so the motivation wasn't there. The passion wasn't there because they didn't see the connection. And even then, they didn't know what to do about it. These were way down in terms of close to actionable steps. And they still, well, what do we do? And I'm like, it was such a huge missed opportunity. And you have all these people then that had given all of this input. And, you know, there's almost nothing worse for a company to do.
Yeah, you're going to damage morale. Yes.
It's better to not do anything than to ask for it and then not do anything. Yes. So I have learned, and I actually, as a coach, I'm a good listener. I spend most of my time listening. In this situation, I didn't translate that skill. I didn't do that. So as a leader, what I have taken away is first and foremost, listen. You observe the problem, dig in from the perspective of the folks who can make a difference, who will drive the change, who have to at least prioritize the change. There may be other people in their team driving it, but you need to really understand it and you need to explicitly connect the dots.
Yes.
We assume that because, and everybody says, oh, you know, the whole thing about assume, our brains work on assumptions. That's how our brains work. We are set up to go from actual data to making assumptions and inferences and making decisions based on that. This is very old wiring. And that made a lot of sense, right? When something jumped out of a bush, tiger, whatever, as they say, and you needed to run, I need to fight, I need to freeze. Our brains haven't changed, but our environments are so much more nuanced that I was going back to the assumptions. I was making all sorts of assumptions that really undermined the success and especially the passion and excitement that people had, that they felt like, yes, this is something we can do, we can be part of to make a difference. And it just didn't.
And it fizzled.
It fizzled.
Oh my gosh. What a painful and valuable lesson for you. Oh, thank you for sharing that. And an ego hit too, right?
Oh, huge ego hit.
Yeah.
You realize again that you want to be this force of change. You want to have this impact and you know you have things to bring to this situation. But going back to what we even were saying earlier, I was judging myself by my intent and I assumed other people saw that. And it's not like they didn't want to or wouldn't have wanted to. I didn't give them the chance.
Yes. What am I assuming to be true is such an important question to learn to ask ourselves.
Yes.
And then check it.
Yes. And so for all of my colleagues, compatriots, all of the leaders that I worked with out there, if you're listening to this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Mea culpa. I am so sorry. I would do this drastically different now. And thank you for being patient with me during my learning experience, even if not frustrated. And to your point, with a morale hit, I really appreciate that all of you stuck with me regardless.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. I was nodding along. Definitely could relate to the proverbial putting the cart before the horse and making assumptions and operating without checking them.
Absolutely.
Or being blind to the assumptions we're going in with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rachel, what an incredible conversation this has been. I am definitely, and I will credit you, but I am using that goo analogy because, man, is it so valuable. I want to get my hands on your book in all sincerity. So tell our listeners, how do we order your book? Where do we find you?
Well, right now, the pre-orders are up for the ebook. So it is butterflygoobook.net. It's a great landing page. I've had some wonderful teams working with me on helping me with all this.
Excellent.
That's where you go for the book. If you just want to find me in general, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Rachel M. Burr, Burr. Okay. And my website for my regular executive coaching is Catamentum. So it's Catamentum. And I'm sure you'll have that in the notes.
We will. We will drop all of your links in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for this conversation. It was enlightening, and I'm pretty sure our listeners will pick up there was a lot of synchronicity in our energy going back and forth on this great topic. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your insight, your lessons learned, and your vulnerability with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I had a wonderful time.
Awesome. Well, listeners, you know the drill. Until next time, go manage like a leader.
Thanks for listening to Confessions of a Terrible Leader. If you're feeling brave and have your own terrible leader story that you'd like to share, head over to transcendleadershipcollective.com/podcast to fill out a guest application. We'd love to hear from you. Confessions of a Terrible Leader is hosted by Layci Nelson and produced and edited by Fixation Point Productions. Music is by Leif Olson and Mary Scott from the band The Number of Months. Confessions of a Terrible Leader is a free leadership resource offered by Transcend Leadership Collective. If you are ready to refuse the limits of average leadership and join the leadership revolution, visit transcendleadershipcollective.com to check out our offerings for engaging workshops, strategic planning, and more. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. And until next time, go manage like a leader.